had a great compliment paid to me this morning. I was out early getting coffee, and one of the brothers greeted me in Maori and thought I was Maori. And that makes me feel real good. So, mahalo, mahalo. I'd like to thank the conference sponsors, first of all, for enabling myself and my wife Rita to join the conference and be here and to offer some insights of affordable housing in my homeland of Hawaii. Um, I don't know who's getting the better deal. We've always wanted to come to New Zealand, my wife and I, and this is a great opportunity for us to learn from the culture to the business that we know. So mahalo to our sponsors. Um, Native Hawaiian housing for the 21st century. Those are big words, hard to achieve. My presentation today, I'll be doing an overview of affordable housing in Hawaii, non-native, and achieving Native Hawaiian homeownership, and what Hawaii's government is doing to assist Native Hawaiian homeownership. I was hoping my presentation be more informal and interactive, but we could be here all night asking questions. And I have a body clock that says I need to eat every 4.5 hours, so it reacts. Anyway, I am Native Hawaiian by definition. I am a 90% Native Hawaiian blood and 10% English blood, thus the last name Hall. But I use the Hall part to my advantage when I need to get into the lines faster and when I need to do charges and things like that. Anyway, it's better to be 90%. My overview would be pretty much a structured outline. I'll give you a definition of affordable in Hawaii, housing ingredients, which means the components that are included in housing, a spectrum of housing or the range of housing that we provide, as well as the process for developing affordable housing. In my opportunity the last 2 days, I'm starting to understand the process that you go through to achieve affordable housing. Ours is somewhat the same, and a lot of differences as well. I'll tend to do my presentation more from a structured government sense. My career with housing has been 33 years, working for the state of Hawaii government, working for the Department of Hawaiian Homelands, which administers the Native Hawaiian Land Trust, as well as working for state housing, which handles everything else: rental housing, rental subsidies, housing development, as well as market development homes. I'm retired now and I do whatever my wife says to do. Start off with definition of affordable housing. By definition, in Hawaii, affordable is if a household spends less than 30% of their income on shelter and utilities. That's a big bite. Then they have definition for if you're spending more than 30%, it's cost burden. If you're spending more than 50%, it's called a severe cost burden. Ultimately, I would say most of Hawaii's people are at that juncture, spending more than 50% of their income for housing, basically because of the cost of housing, and you'll see it throughout my presentation. In essence, your income determines what you can afford. The terminology affordable housing is somewhat not affordable in Hawaii. The housing components that I want to share with you is Hawaii consists of a little over 4 million acres of land. And there's land designations, which basically says what the land can be used for. These are set up by government laws and pretty much requires government to change the designation. So of the 4 million or so acres, 48% is designated conservation, 47% is designated as agricultural, meaning for farming, and 5% basically designated for urban. Of all the land in Hawaii, 70% is owned by 3 major landowners. This includes the federal government, it includes the state of Hawaii and all its land assets, including the Department of Hawaiian Homelands, and it includes the Bishop Estate Trust, which is an $8 billion trust established by Princess Berenice Pauahi, whose sole mission is basically to educate the native Hawaiian children. Housing in Hawaii, the last report in 2013 is that there was about 450,000 housing units occupying the state of Hawaii, for a total of 1.4 million people living in the state of Hawaii. That's based on the latest demographic and census take. It's expected that by the year 2025, at least 65,000 more homes will be needed to accommodate the existing as well as growing population. And Hawaii is only developing 2,000 units per year. This is all of Hawaii. This is all of housing. This is not just native housing. I'm trying to carve the picture for you on what housing is like in Hawaii. The concept of land also is a little bit different for most people in Hawaii versus the cultural definition. Most people see land as pure real estate, whereas our native culture, they view land as real estate, but they also view it for its spiritual content. And there is a growing, internal battle, external battle between those who look at land more spiritually than real estate, and there's a challenge to make sure that the right amount of development is done without losing the spiritual content and cultural awareness that the land provides. Spectrum of housing is basically the range of housing. I show you on the screen, starting with market housing, which I say is the top. The average cost of a house in Hawaii, just a house, is $913,000 US dollars. Large part of that is the cost of the land. Land is very limited, and obviously it drives the cost up based on availability. A condominium is going for about 440,000 plus US dollars. Condominium is probably where Hawaii is going to be, what Hawaii is going to be using to address its affordable housing issue. You can't go horizontal anymore. There's hardly any more land. Well, I take that back. We have an active volcano on the Big Island of Hawaii that's actually creating more land. So in 2,000 years from now, we'll solve our housing problem. So everything is going vertical. Everything is going high rise. Hawaii is at a 40-story building limit, and more buildings are constantly going up. If you're a longtime resident of Hawaii like myself, it's hard to see. It's hard to see places where you grew up no longer there. You worry about whether or not the amount of high rises will influence the wind coming from the mountains, thus the sea going in. And you really don't know. But then you also feel a soft heart for locals who have no place to go, and they have to rely on what's available. Anyway, it is an ongoing dilemma and challenge for us. We have approximately 7,000 military units occupying Hawaii space. The military has a big presence in Hawaii. It's strategically located in the middle of the Pacific. And I don't think the military is going to go anywhere, especially not with North Korea acting up, and who else knows. Oh, and by the way, we have an election between Hillary and Donald Trump coming up that I might just stay here, Yeah. On the low income side, define low income meaning, those that are paying 50% or more of their rent. There's approximately 22,000, maybe 23,000 units that were government built, private built, that are occupied by people of lower income. These also include government-built and subsidized public housing, where you only pay 30% of your rent to stay in housing, and the rest of the cost is subsidized by either state or federal monies. Those are for extremely low families, some families who can barely afford public assistance. That's where they usually end up, and that's a whole dilemma of social challenges itself that it presents. Then we have what I call the spectrum, or the range on the bottom, for those that are homeless. Hawaii has currently about 30 shelters. It is a growing problem for us in Hawaii, and problem in the sense that people just don't have places to stay. Local people are, are tapped out on the income that they can afford. They can't stay in the units that they are. Some are faced with families who have multiple challenges, and they get thrown out of the places where they are. And there's not a quick fix. Glad to say that the state and the counties in Hawaii are working on a Housing First initiative to try to address the amount of homeless. But there's currently a little over 6,000 people that they count. Because of Hawaii's beauty, we also attract homeless from the rest of the country. And I'm not saying that in a bad way, but it's hard to balance out the needs for our locals when the planes continue to come. Our weather is constantly 75 degrees all year round. We wouldn't be able to tell you the difference between winter and summer because it's kind of constant. And Hawaii provides, a perfect background for living on the streets. It's not a good thing. We need to help solve that problem. What's missing in this continuum is mid-level housing, that middle step that, okay, I can make this much, but that's too much of a climb for me to get to those big, expensive houses. Where's the apartment? Where's that affordable unit that I can graduate to, earn more money until I can get to that higher level achievement? There's nothing like that in Hawaii right now. The spectrum is broken, it's splintered. You're either up here or you're here. And it's very challenging for those in the middle that are trying to get, better accommodations. The process for developing housing in Hawaii, it's a journey. Land is either owned, purchased, or leased. And once you have land, I talked earlier about the designations of conservation and agricultural. If you want to build a house on that land, you have to get that designation changed, if it's agriculture or conservation. In order to do that, you have to go through a series of hearings. You got to go to Public Utilities Commission. That's what the acronym PUC for. There's a use board that you need to go through. That process in itself can take anywhere from 2 to 5 years, the government process, just to get the rezoning done of that particular parcel of land. And then the next process, you got to go to the local counties or jurisdictions that have direct input over building codes, building constructions, zoning, things like that. And that process can take another 2 years to achieve. Hawaii is an island state. There's regulations for coastal zone management. There's strong regulations for environmental concerns. Being an island state, being a state, we're impacted by all the regulations the federal government puts out on environmental. As it impacts the land, that process needs to be dealt with and gone through also. We also are impacted by what they call special management area. Besides coastal zone management area, special management is that area between the beach and a road. Those, if you have land holdings, if you have land holdings on the beach, you're probably super rich right now in Hawaii. But the people who want to, build in that area also have to go through a separate process for special management. And then we have the overwhelming Federal Endangered Species Act. The island of Maui, as well as the whole island of the big island of Hawaii is, everything there is pretty much considered endangered species. Where the birds live, where the animals reside. So your land is probably lucky that if it doesn't have the birds landing or the animals come through it, and you wouldn't have to go with the Endangered Species Act. I often wondered, as far as endangered species, a bird can get an endangered species, a plant can get. I'd like to see if us native Hawaiians can be getting a native endangered species recognition sometime soon. Sorry for the editorialism, sorry about that. This process that I just pointed out can take 10 years. Okay, so if you need housing today, good luck. It's not gonna happen. You gotta go through this process. All developers in Hawaii go through this process. If they're not challenged by court action or by, environmentalist groups that don't want development, as a whole, you go through 10 years. It can even take longer. We just recently had a large development clear all the court battles, clear all the public hearings, clear the second court battles, and are breaking ground for construction for about 20,000 homes in central Oahu. They took agricultural land and are converting it over a 15, 20-year period for 20,000 homes. Their process took 20 years to achieve. Now, if you're somebody who wants to preserve the remaining lands for agriculture, you'd be saying, well, that's a bad thing. But if you need housing, then it's a good thing. So it's that balance we're trying to strike in Hawaii. Okay, challenges for non-native Hawaiians. Over half of all renters live in units they can't afford. 80% of the extremely low are paying more than half of their income towards rent. Oh yeah, by the way, you got to pay for electric bills. Utilities are one of the highest in the United States. Electricity bills are. We import all our oil. We're trying to get off of fossil fuel. By that I mean, we're exploring more into solar and wind energy, and there's a large amount of wind farms and solar farms that advocates are pushing for and are being done. And transportation is also a major cost for a homeowner. Gas, we probably pay one of the higher prices of gas in the United States. The prices has come down because the oil prices in the Middle East have also come down. So we're actually enjoying, cheaper gas at $3 US, for a gallon. And that's a good thing for us right now. So just by definition alone, I focus you on the green side. If you wanted to rent a 2-bedroom apartment, the apartment would probably run for a fair market rate of $1,640 a month. You should be earning $65,000 a year. You should be earning $5,400 a month. Your wage should be about $32 an hour. And you'll need to work 91 hours a week. We all doing 91 hours a week, right? It's just the rest not the math not working. And if you're making the minimum wage of $7.25, well, the minimum wage went a little bit up, but if you're making $7.25 an hour, you need to have 4.5 full-time jobs in order to get that, by definition, so that only 30% of your rent is paying for utilities and house. That's not happening. That's in Disneyland. That's not happening. What are the challenges? Well, what else get? I just mentioned all the challenges, right? The larger challenge is families are forced to sacrifice. They make quality of life choices. They don't eat good, proper food. They compromise on education. By that I mean, education. Drop the kids off, okay, get to work, come back, pick the kids up. I'm too tired to study with you. I gotta get up, or I gotta go to my second job. So the interaction between parent and child on educational values gets compromised. Nutritional foods, it's too hard to go home and cook a fresh meal after you've been in an hour and a half traffic. And if you don't get home till 8:30 at night and you gotta get up 5 o'clock in the morning, then you're driving through McDonald's. That's what you do. Nothing wrong with McDonald's. Look, I'm a fan, but it's not something you do 7 days a week. And those are the compromises family make. And even childcare, the ability to afford good childcare, not necessarily dropping them off at your sister's place, things like that. It's just too much decisions you have to make to get affordable housing. I did mention there's a growing opposition, to convert our remaining agricultural lands or conservation lands for development. People like Hawaii being what it is, we all do, but there's no place to live. And there are also cultural and archaeological impacts that impact Native Hawaiian. A lot of developments are going over our burial grounds. A lot of paths are going through air. And, pretty much when Hawaii was occupied by Hawaiians, burial grounds were all over the place. It was where you resided, where, there wasn't no cemetery like we have now. It was pretty much a cultural thing. There's multiple burial grounds. A lot of it was by the sea. So as you're doing a infrastructure development and you're digging up a road and you're going down 16 feet before you hit water, chances are you'll hit EV or bones. And it's a process that needs to be dealt with, correctly. It just takes time to the inevitable. I mean, the end result. Okay, and so I'm getting kind of obvious here why families struggle, right? But we do have the highest cost of living in Hawaii. The wage rate, the average wage rate, isn't the highest. We have a large tourism industry. Um, a lot of our families work in the tourism industry. Why can't I say that word? Tourism industry. Anyway, and the wages aren't the greatest. We have a lot of taxes in our state. It seems like we have taxes for everything. So you can spend almost 20-30% of your paycheck goes towards taxes. A lot of people are just asset poor. They don't have nothing to leverage. A lot of people have poor credit. They're forced to live on credit cards because of the cost of living, and their FICO scores go down, in the 600, 500 range. Um, People aren't able to get apartments because they can't come up with the down payments for the first month, sometimes 2 months. They don't have the educational requirements it takes to be smart enough to ask the right questions and go to the right places to get help. Um, and like I mentioned, there's no affordable medium level housing, and there's a lot of social challenges, especially for our Native Hawaiians. People tend to look at themselves as, well, I'm not meant to be, and they start giving up on themselves, because of the challenge too hard, and then that's not a good thing. There are solutions, okay, but solutions, in my vast career working in housing, they require dedicated efforts. And to increase housing affordability and prevent homeless, here's some things that can be done. The state has what they call a rental housing trust fund, which subsidizes affordable housing developments for low-income residents. The way this works is through tax credits. Uh, Large investors who are interested in purchasing tax credits to help offset their responsibility to government puts up the cash. This cash is turned into subsidies or construction money to build affordable housing. It is a win-win thing because the tax investor is looking for that tax credit, solely that tax credit, and private as well as government sector developers offset the cost of construction considerably, by selling these tax credits. They can bring the cost down, sometimes 40%. They are looking into different type of housing, micro apartments, accessory dwelling units, which means families that are fortunate enough to own their home in Hawaii, if they have space, the county zonings are allowing them to add additional houses to the family house without having to worry about infrastructure upgrades or if there's enough water or sewer to address that. Um, and there's also a need to preserve our current housing stock. I know I hear a lot about making sure once the houses are built here, that it's been taken care of properly. Unfortunately, in Hawaii, that's the last thing guys put aside money for is property maintenance. So we have a lot of our inventory just, dwindling. And instead of knocking them down or losing it, there should be some effort to make sure they can be preserved. Government leaders need to look at housing policies. They need to look at what works. I like to say they need to look at the end result and not be so focused on the process. Our 10-year land use process and conversion for affordable housing, that's nothing to help affordable housing's end result. So we need to look at that. We need to create community-wide housing plans where we bring the pros and the cons together, and try to come up with, agreed upon answers. Hawaii is undergoing a major infrastructure project. We're putting in a rail system. It's supposed to shave off time for coming on the west side of Oahu, going into town. The system itself was supposed to be built for $5.5 billion. It's currently hovering around $8 billion, and we're not sure where it's going to end. But once completed, the intent of the rail system will also support what they call transit-oriented development, where the trains stop. There's an opportunity to build development, and the development would make it close enough and convenient for people to get back and forth to work, so you address the need for transportation. It'll take cars off the road, so you possibly could have more land to develop on. And living in a closer, more central environment where you got your doctors, your stores, your schools, may be easier for families instead of having to commute across islands like we do now. Anyway, that's the goal. Um, and I mentioned in black, everything will require putting affordable housing as a priority. Quick story, in the early 80s, right after the major, there was early 80s, look, I'm going way back. Everybody's like, 80s, when was that? 1980s. In Hawaii, there was a severe housing shortage, a housing dilemma, and government at that time took a bold step. They created an agency with superpowers. They created an agency that didn't have to go through the process, or it did, but it was an expedited process. And they built homes in droves. They contracted out, a bunch of developers, and they put up the streets, put up the houses, and homes were built. In hindsight, some of the roads weren't done the best. Some of the houses may not have been done the best, but there's over, I would like to say, at least 6,000 families that benefited from that surge. I guess all I'm saying is, if government wants to make it happen, it can happen. Yeah. Okay, let's talk about Native Hawaii's housing. In Hawaii, there's two lead agencies that are involved with Native housing. The first is the Office of Hawaiian Affairs, and the second is the Department of Hawaiian Homelands, where I used to work for. Can I make the print smaller, right? So, Office of Hawaiian Affairs, in short, their focus is to help Native Hawaiians through cultural preservation, through education, through awareness, through making sure that, all the internal assets, all our cultural things are maintained and preserved and set forth with our children going forward. They're set aside to give out grants to help, on areas that help charter schools, that help educational programs, that helps, in our environmental, especially on preserving reefs and things like that. And they tend to focus more on everything else but housing. Their housing policy is basically to help Native Hawaiians become more credit worthy in the marketplace, or even with Hawaiian homelands. Get them financially prepared to be homeowners. Many cases, people walk into a home ownership situation, they're not ready. Their financial background, their credit scores, their jobs aren't sufficient to pay the proposed mortgage amount, and they get bypassed. Enough times they get bypassed, they just give up. So OHA's housing policy is to help people of Native blood get ready. The Department of Hawaiian Homelands, its mission is to manage the Hawaiian Homelands Trust and land set aside for that trust. It partners with the community to help deliver and develop lands for Native Hawaiians. Our Prince, Jonah Kuhio, spearheaded the creation of the Department of Hawaiian Homelands and the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act as a delegate to the US Congress in 1920. After closely 10 to 15 years of working in Congress as a representative from the territory of Hawaii, he was able to get passage of a law that created the Hawaiian Homes Commission Act and set aside lands in the state of Hawaii specifically for Native Hawaiians who are of blood ancestry, which is 50% or more by current definition. 200,000 acres were set aside. Now, remember that earlier slide I told you there's like 4 million acres in the state of Hawaii total? 200,000 acres were set aside for just the Native Hawaiians. Hawaiian Homelands is headed by an executive board. They call themselves the Hawaiian Homes Commission. They're representative of each of the island states, the island counties, and they're appointed by the governor of Hawaii. In 1959, when we became a state, Hawaiian Homes and its assets were transferred over to Hawaii state government. Good or bad, that's what happened. And the governor appoints the members of the Hawaiian Homes Commission, as well does he appoint the chairman of the Department of Hawaiian Homelands, which administers the program on a day-to-day basis. Let me just share a few more facts about Homeland Trust before I move on. Just a second. As I mentioned, you'd have to be at least 50% Native Hawaiian blood or 18 years old to be eligible to have land holdings on Hawaiian homelands. You have to actually apply for land. It doesn't come automatically because you have the blood quantum. There are lands on all islands, and the way lands are issued out is via leases. People are issued leases, long-term leases, 99 years. You pay $1 a year for your lease, and you're able to, reside on the homestead lands. Okay, what's the definition of affordable? Again, income determines affordability for what a Native Hawaiian can afford. As I show, land is leased for $1 a year. Lease is renewable for another 100 years. Interesting to say that since the act was created in 1920, 1921, the first 99 years are just coming around. And for those who received leases, I think they began giving out leases probably not to 1930s or even the 40s. Those leases are the first that's being turned over and going through the next 100 years. The majority of leases issued by the Hawaiian Homelands were done probably in the 60s, 70s, and 80s. So those folks have a long time to go. And after that, they got another 100 years, and who knows what's after that. It's basically the closest they're going to get to perpetuity or owning the land themselves. But the land remains with the trust. Hawaiian Homelands subsidizes the cost of housing by paying for all the costs of infrastructure development. So they put in the streets, they put in the roads, they bring in the sewer systems, they even build sewer treatment plants if they need be. And they do all the off-site and on-site infrastructure it takes to put the homesteader on the land. The Native Hawaiian, when they apply and they're called that their name is up, they have to pay for the costs of the vertical construction or the house that resides on the land. That's their portion. Again, Hawaiian Homes has 200,000 acres. They basically have these types of housing programs: residential, which is its most popular, agricultural, pastoral, which is ranching, and aquacultural, which really hasn't been implemented yet, but I believe it once it gets implemented, it'll help create a new stream of opportunity using the adjacent beaches to our homestead. Right now, as far as housing, there's a little over 8,000 residential leases, which means there's a little over 8,000 houses. Doesn't seem much when you look at it's been in existence since 1920, but I'll illustrate the struggles going forward. There's 1,100 agricultural leases. Agricultural leases where we have farmers who actually, grow stuff. I would guess to say that the success rate of the Hawaiian homestead farmer is probably, you'll have less than 20% successful farmers using the land. The department is trying to improve that program and get more assistance so that farmers can be, self-sufficient. And there's 408 pastoral or ranch land leases. Most of those are active leases with people who, ranchers who raise cattle, sheep, other sort of livestock. Right now, like I mentioned, there's no aquatic leases right now. There's a total of 9,800 leases, and there's an estimated 30,000 applicants still waiting to get onto the homestead land. Again, if you do the math, that's a long wait. Yeah. The spectrum of housing for Hawaiian homelands, they basically build single-family homes. They don't build high-rises. They also do kupuna homes. They have one project on the east side of Oahu for elderly, or kupuna. But they don't do anything else. They don't build apartments. They don't have condos, they don't have rental units, nor do they have homeless shelters. So the array of housing units that Hawaiian Homes eventually can do is still growing. They are testing out their rental housing program. They haven't really fully gotten into that yet, but just by sheer crisis of affordability on everything around them, they're almost forced to go and look at the rental options right now. The process for development, like I mentioned earlier with the private sector, the Hawaiian Homes Commission, which is the board, they have land use autonomy. They determine what the land can be used for. If they want to take pastoral land and turn it into residential, it's done. That's what they do. And that's the benefit of being Native Hawaiian and what you can do. Department of Hawaiian Homelands chooses to follow and go by county rules on planning, design, permitting, and everything. It's important for the Department of Hawaiian Lands to stay consistent with its adjoining neighbors and properties. If Hawaiian Homelands did not have any type of county ordinance or structure, you could very well see paved roads, no street lights, and then paved roads again. And then you guess which is the Hawaiian Home ones, right? So it's important that they make that choice, although they don't have to. They can choose to make their own codes, and I'm thinking at some point in time they will probably do that to expedite housing. The HHL is subject to all environmental rules, as well as the coastal zone rules we talked about, special management rules, and endangered species rules. But their process from development can take as little as 3 to 5 years, as opposed to 10 years in the private sector. Okay, so, things are looking up. It's only 5 years now. Let's see what else we got to do. The Native Hawaiians, they have a structure where they start off with island plans. They have a series of hearings with the beneficiaries, and beneficiaries are Native Hawaiian applicants waiting to get on the land. And they ask them for input on the available lands that they have and what they'd like to see. Similar to what you folks do in once you carve out a parcel. Those are called island plans. And then island plans, Oahu, Hawaii, Maui, Kauai, Molokai, there are further breaking down into regional plans, which is north, south, east, west of the islands. And those living in that area get further determination on how they like to see, their planning goals. And lastly, existing community associations of existing homestead areas also have feedback in determining the plan. This process here is probably equivalent to a non-native process where they have to go out to the community, get feedback from all adjoining neighbors, get feedback from schools, churches, and community groups on what they like to see for the broader plan. This is the Hawaiian Homes version of that, yet on abbreviated timeline. Okay, economic and social challenges. Right now, most of our people waiting for homelands are probably doubled up, maybe tripled up, living with family, overcrowded situations. Can't help, that's just what they need to do. It's pretty much a guarantee that they're paying more than 50% of their income for rent if they're renting. Husband and wife probably both working. Again, the utilities issue and the transportation issue are consistent with native as well as non-native. Economic challenges are pretty much the same as well. Bad credit, down payment requirements, the sacrifice in quality of life. And one thing that's new on this list is that the revenue levels for the Department of Hawaiian Homelands is not sufficient enough to keep up with the demand. So Hawaiian Homelands has the land, it has an abbreviated process to develop, but it doesn't have the finances, to develop. So that what drags out the process as well. And also, on an overall basis, development is inconsistent. If you have a governor for the state of Hawaii that comes in and makes Native Hawaiian housing a priority, then the funding comes, then the development comes, then you can build 400, 500 units in 2 years because the priority is there. And over the years, that's been the dilemma for homestead. It's been inconsistent. Some administrations come in, make it a priority, it happens. Then some administration comes in and the priority is education or social services. So the limited state funds, don't trickle down to the Hawaiian Homes bucket and development doesn't happen. So in some years you can build 500 and the next year you build none. That inconsistency is a challenge for people waiting on the list. They have no idea when they're going to get called. Yeah, and it makes it really hard to gauge for. Again, like those in the non-native sector, Hawaiians families are unprepared. They face high cost of living. All the indicators that I listed previously, same thing, no different. We're part of the same island. Why would it be different? So how does Hawaiian Homelands actually achieve home ownership? Again, the biggest program that Hawaiian Homelands administers is its residential lease program. This process starts off where they consult with beneficiaries in developing residential areas set aside. They use their limited funding to develop its land following that 3 to 5 years process that I mentioned. It secures contractors and developers to do infrastructure development. Simultaneously, they're sending out notices to applicants based on their date of application. Selection is made by when you applied for homestead. And those families who get selected start a financial coordination and screening process to get them eligible to purchase the home, the vertical construction. Hawaiian Homelands facilitates the house construction and finds options that best suit the applicant's needs. In order to achieve this, Hawaiian Homes has been growing and setting up home buyers education programs itself. The HOPE program or the HOLLY program are two of the more recent ones within the last 15 years that basically handholds our people on a waiting list through the financial screening process on how to become a homeowner, how to get the financing, how to take care of your home, what happens, if you should pass away, where does your home go to? Hawaiian Homes also, because it's only leased land and not available to non-Hawaiians, it had to create a program where private financial institutions could come in and support mortgage requests. So what Hawaiian Homes does is it guarantees the loans made by the native beneficiaries with local banks. It's called the FHA 247 program. It's probably helped thousands of native Hawaiians get on the land. In case of default, the Hawaiian Homelands basically buys out the mortgage and deals with the situation. That's the guarantee they have to put on the bank because the bank cannot foreclose on homestead property. Over the last, I would say, 8 years, the Department of Hawaiian Homelands have gotten earmarks from the federal government by way of the NAHASDA, Native American Housing and Self-Determination Act funding. NAHASDA funding is also available for Native American Indians and Native Alaskan Indians. And Hawaii was able to get its share of that money. It receives approximately $5 to $9 million a year, which they use to help subsidize the cost of what Hawaiian Home does, building the infrastructure, providing education, and working with the homeowner to get on the land. The home options, there are several options that's done. We call it turnkey. I think that's what you're used to, where a contractor builds the house and the family gets the key and they move in. That's probably the easiest, maybe a little bit more expensive method to deliver homes in Hawaii. The developer does everything from infrastructure to building the house. You just got to qualify for the loan. Once you qualify for the loan, you get the keys to the house. Because you don't have to pay for land costs, the cost of doing that is, house costs on Hawaiian Homelands is probably between $250,000 to $300,000 to occupy a turnkey home on homestead land. That'll be a single family, probably 2-bedroom, probably 3-bedroom or 4-bedroom, 2-bath house with a carport. I was watching the slides earlier, and I noticed that the carport, or where you park the garage, what they do in Hawaii, Once they get the keys to the house, the carport automatically becomes living space. It becomes the patio. It becomes the location for your parties. It becomes where you put stuff that you don't know where to put, you know. So the cars don't never even have a chance to go in the garage. They're all on the streets or on the grass, which is, you know, when you look at the planners, they say, well, they're supposed to park in the garage. Yeah, right. You're going to tell them to do that. No. In most cases, it's converted to bedrooms, and they love it. They just love that. Okay. Department of Hawaiian Homelands also has an owner-builder program where those that are savvy about development and can build their own house doesn't choose one of the package homes. They just go build their own house. They follow the permitting process and they can choose their own design and build their own house. We have a lot of Native Hawaiians with resources that are building beautiful homes on the island of Maui, up country in Kula. When I first drove through that, nobody told me that was homestead land, and I could swear I was driving through places like Diamond Head or the high-end places because the Native Hawaiians were just building beautiful houses up there. Just makes me proud. Um, oh, is that the lunch bell? I hope. Okay, watch me rip. Okay. Um, I quickly want to mention a program that worked for Hawaiian Homelands. It's called an undivided interest program. It's where Hawaiian Homes sets aside a large parcel of land, say a land area that can handle 300 built homes once they're done. They look for 300 applicants on the wait list, and they make them eligible for this development when the time comes. As the department is developing the land, putting the infrastructure in, getting the houses contracted, and these 300 families are working with the homesteads, the department, to get financially ready. Except they get issued a lease to this large parcel of land on day one. They become a guarantee owner of a lease once those houses are done. They don't wait till the houses are done. This is important and good for families who've been on the list so long, because you don't have to get financial qualifications to get one of these leases, at least not initially. So for kupuna or families that have limited income, they take the lease, they become a homeowner, and in most cases, they pass that lease on to their heir, who is of lesser Hawaiian blood and who's probably more financially able to do that. So this program is being further developed on homestead land. It seems to be working. There's some kinks in it, but it's an opportunity to get leases in Hawaiians' hands sooner and let them work their way into financial eligibility, let them work their way into getting into a house. But if should anything happen to that person, here's my lease grandson, here's my lease daughter, go finish my legacy. Yeah, I think that's one of the better programs that's created. Um, I'll just drive through. This is close to my last slide. If I was king, if I had all the powers in the world to make housing happen, I would look for a situation where there's strong policies that facilitates timely results, not 10-year results, timely results. I would try to assure that there was consistent funding for housing, not situations where you constantly got to write for grants and depend whether you're going to get the money or not. I would look for a consistent production of housing and various housing options. In other words, don't build 2,000, build 200 or build 300 a year every year, guaranteed. Don't stop. Just, don't make that political promise, I'm going to build 5,000 houses. You can't, it's impossible. But you can build 500 a year for the rest of your life, you know. Do early consultation with your communities. Get your communities involved. Get the naysayers involved. Talk to the environmentalists. Why it's important for me to have a house so I can support your environmental needs. Yeah, you gotta collaborate and live together. Reassess the overall development process. Like I mentioned, it takes too long. Maybe something more suitable to the area. If you're in the middle of the island and you're on a mountain, what you care about shoreline management stuff, really, only a tsunami is going to get to you. So why can't you bypass that regulation? And lastly, And I say this as a government worker, and I mean this to no offense to government workers, but solve the problem, don't protect the process. Okay? Facilitate, don't regulate. Make the answer happen. Mahalo. You know, I saw the previous speakers and special guests come and they offered chant and song. And I asked our MC, should I do that? You know, I might sing a Bruno Mars song or something that I know well. But in honor of my culture, I'd like to sing for you what may have been our national anthem instead of the one that we have right now, if you oblige me. E Hawaii e kuone hanau e kuuhome kula iwi nei oli no au I nā pono lani o e Hawaii aloha e hau oli e nā o pio Hawaii ne e oli mai nā ahe makani e pā mai nei mau ke aloha no Hawaii e Hawaii aloha Mahalo.